Everyone to this morning's committee hearing. I'm joined by Councilwoman Perry. We do not have a quorum as of yet, but Mr. City Attorney, we will proceed, and any action that we take will be deemed to communicate from the chair. We've got, in fact, at the suggestion of Ms. Perry, what I think I want to do is go to item 1, where it relates to Mr. Gathers, and then we'll come back and we'll do the consent calendar.
Okay.
Does that work? Now, I had a very long meeting with him Monday, so Ms. Perry, I literally have no questions for him at all.
No.
But Anne Marie, if you could read the item.
Sure. Communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. Dwayne Gathers to the Community Redevelopment Agency Board of Commissioners.
Okay. You want to come forward? I have no questions, but I do have to say something. New York, from New York, Massachusetts, from Massachusetts, was it South Africa?
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Then South Africa.
France.
France.
Then Washington, D.C.
Then, okay, you do it then.
My circuitous journey to Los Angeles started in Harlem. From there, through the ABC program, I went to school in Massachusetts, on to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire with a language study program in France, after which I was a banker in New York. Decided I enjoyed public policy more, went to Washington, D.C., working at HUD, then somehow migrated to the State Department doing international affairs, somehow found my way in South Africa for 4.5 years representing the state of California, on to San Francisco, and then to Los Angeles, where I worked for LAEDC, and then 2 years ago today, started Gather Strategy, a small business development consulting firm here in Los Angeles. 2 years old exactly today. Okay. Anyway, it's very interesting and remarkable a life, seen a lot, definitely an asset to this commission. So without any further questions, and there are no cards on this item. I do have 2 cards.
I wanted to say something just about him for the record.
Okay, well, Ms. Perry.
Yeah. I'm very pleased about this appointment. I've worked with Dwayne for many years, and I'm impressed with his common sense and pragmatic approach to solving problems. He has been particularly effective on letting businesses know the importance of being located in an enterprise zone and accessing incentives. I previously appointed Dwayne to the BTAC, or the Business Tax Advisory Committee, and again was impressed with his ability to navigate complex issues with a sense of equity, balance, and intelligence. So being on the CRA will be good for all of us, and I expect we'll be able to get more work done in a linear and straightforward fashion, and I think it'll be a pleasure to have him there.
And Ms. Perry, I concur. Now, we have 2 individuals that did want to speak on this item, but let me say, if you're here in support of him, when you are a salesperson, when you know that you have the sale, you shut the heck up. Now, if you feel compelled that you must speak, I will call my dear friend, Sacramento Days, Annie, and but you don't have to, and the representative of the LA Chamber of Commerce. So Annie's good, and is it Sam Barrison? They're good. So, Thank you. Well, the sale has been made. Okay, thank you so much. That brings us to, do we have the other 2 commissioners here? Can we do them on consent, or?
Lacey is here. Ms. Shu is here also, yes.
Okay, so there are no cards on those. Thank you, Mr. Gathers. We'll see you in a bit. There are no cards on the The two commissioners, one is for the Rent Adjustment Commission, the other is Industrial Development Authority. Did you have any questions, Ms.
No,
Perry?
no.
Read the item, Anne Marie.
Communication from the mayor relative to the appointment of Mr. J.C. Lacey to the Rent Adjustment Commission.
And then read the other item as well.
Item 3, communication from the council president relative to the reappointment of Ms. Bishu to the Industrial Development Authority Board of Directors.
Okay, without objection, we will move those two items as a communique from the chair. Okay, that brings us to items 4 through 7. If you could read item 4.
Item 4, CRA report relative to fourth quarter, year-end, fiscal year 2009-10, AB 1290 status report.
Okay, we'll receive and file the CRA report. Item 5.
CRA report relative to a quarterly status report on CRA investments as of June 30th, 2010.
Okay, we'll receive and file that CRA report as well. That brings us to item 6.
CRA report and resolutions and CAO report relative to public hearing, environmental action, and related actions to approve a disposition and development agreement with Watts Cinema and Education Center for disposition at no cost and development of an education center and 4-screen cinema on vacant CRA-owned property located at 10341 Graham Avenue, Watts, in the Watts redevelopment project area.
Okay, then on that item, we'll adopt the CAO report, and that brings us to item 7.
Motion Perry Smith relative to accepting $400,000 from the CRA for use by the Office of Community Beautification for the South of Santa Monica Freeway Clean and Safe program.
Okay, then we will adopt that item. That brings us to the item that I think most people are here for today. That's item number 8.
Would you like to take it
8
with
and
item
9?
9? Okay. Los Angeles Housing Department report dated September 1st, 2010, in response to City Attorney Report, Ordinance, and Motion, Reyes-Garcetti, Hahn, Alarcon-Koretz, and Reyes-Wesson, relative to amending the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. And item 9, LHD report relative to the implementation of the Tenant Habitability Program and its impact on primary renovation activity in rent-stabilized buildings.
Okay, with that said, if I could get the department representatives to come forward. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You want to,
Yes, we'll introduce ourselves
Yeah.
first of
Okay.
all. Doug Guthrie, I'm the general manager for the LA Housing Department. Anna?
Anna Ortega, the Director of the Rent Stabilization Division.
Haka Mordezai, Chief Hearing Officer for the Housing Department.
Roberto Aldapi, Assistant General Manager.
okay. Last week, we met very early, and we had an extremely long meeting that primarily consisted of comments from the public. Today, we want to focus the time that we have on you and asking you a series of questions, and then make a determination as to how we will proceed with this item at this point in time. So you want to make some opening statements, Doug?
Well, we made our primary opening statements last week, and I thought we had just some excellent testimony from all sides of this issue, which we heard last week. You know, we know what the primary issues of concern are, and so the staff is here to respond to any questions that you might have.
Okay, so let's deal with the floor, this 3%. Just so I'll know, do the landlords automatically raise this? What's the percentage of the ones that actually raise it? Do they all do it, or do we know? Do we have any idea?
We don't know, because we don't have a rent registry system. We don't track rents. We just, what we do is provide them with what the allowable percentage increase is for them, but we have no way of tracking with specificity who raises rents and who doesn't, or to what extent that they raise the rents. Roberto, Haka is...
What we do know, council members, is that the market rent has been going down. That is one fact that has been provided to us by the data out there, is that the rents on market units are increasing. And we've certainly have received at the Housing Department plenty of anecdotal reports.
Well, broke a leg.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. There goes the rent floor.
Excuse me, council member.
Yes.
We receive routinely anecdotal reports about landlords not raising rents in this climate, particularly when the rents are at or about the market rate, whereas what we have also heard from tenant testimony is that if the rents are significantly below market, landlords still do impose the annual allowable increase in order to move that rent closer to the market rent as permitted under the law.
You know, we heard last week, I mean, I understand that you've got hardliners from, you know, representing tenants and the landlords, but we did hear some people in the middle that acknowledged the fact that tenants need landlords and landlords need tenants. And so I do think that it's our responsibility to try to come up with a way where they can coexist. And in order to do that, in order to help the people that really, really, really need the help, one of the things that I had some concerns about was, let's say you've got a family of 4 that's making $35,000 living in a unit where a guy is making $120,000 and a guy that's making $120,000 is paying the same amount as the individuals that are making $35,000. And that just doesn't work for me. In fact, there was a guy that Andrew and I met with who indicated, in fact, I don't see him, his name is Keith Moray, that he had rented a place to a guy, and the guy sublet the place for better than double the rent before Keith caught him. I mean, so why is it such a problem to do means testing? We've just been joined by Mr. Alarcon and we have Mr. Reyes, so we do have a quorum, Mr. City Attorney. So that's one of the things that I had asked. So can we spend a minute? Because let me just tell you what my thought is. First, I want to applaud the department for all of the hard work that you put into this. And I know that you've worked hand in hand with Andrew from my office and the CLA and everybody to try to put this together, and I commend you for that. But I just have this question in my mind: is this thing ready yet? Is this soup completely cooked? Have we added every ingredient that we could? And I'm just not prepared to say that we have done that. So if you could talk to me about means testing for a minute.
Well, under the current RSO, of course, there is no means testing. It's approximately 630,000 units that fall under this. To be able to do means testing, first of all, we would need to do the rent registry, which would be tracking the individual rents of units for those 630,000 units. Secondly, doing means testing and income certifications on a regular basis for 630 households would be, if nothing else, administratively very difficult to do.
Okay, then let me stop you and ask you a question. Is there anywhere else within the country where they do this?
Where they do means testing under a rent control or rent stabilization program. Not that we know of, where there is means testing done. Again, I think just imagining doing income verifications, income reviews for 630 households on an annualized basis, because that's effectively what we would have to do. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it would be extremely challenging and would be administratively burdensome to do that. Secondly, our concern is if this were directed towards means testing, there would be a concern that landlords would tend to not want to bring tenants in that are close to falling within that means test. In other words, we don't want things to work against those tenants that are low and moderate income, and there might tend to be more of a discrimination against low and moderate income if there's a means test associated with the rent stabilization ordinance. And as Anna is showing me here, that there is vacancy decontrol, so the rent is reset as agreed to by each tenancy. So there's a reset of the rents once that rent stabilized unit has been vacated.
The point
Please,
being,
go right
Councilman, that we don't have rent control in the City of Los Angeles scheme. We have a vacancy, and we've always had a vacancy decontrol mechanism. So at each tenancy, the landlord and the tenant agree to what the new rent will be. So the examples that you gave where there's different incomes and different family composition, the rent was reset when they initiated their tenancy, and the landlord and tenant agreed to the new rent. So the rent is only controlled while the tenancy is existing.
Okay.
Councilmember, if I could also
Yes.
add, one of the, when we took a look at this issue in all the meetings that we had, one of the solutions that we came up with, because we found means testing problematic both on an administrative, a legal, and also a policy basis, is to update the RSO's luxury exemption amounts, which have been there at the same amount since the early 70s. And we applied housing inflation numbers to them, and we brought them to the amounts that are indicated in our reports. And the way that that exemption would work is that if you were already renting those units at that amount or higher by as of May 2010, then you would be, and you can establish that by evidence, then you would be able to come and apply for it. So this is something that you wouldn't necessarily have known of back in May 2010. We hadn't made this proposal. So this was you had already been renting it. And these numbers are high enough that if they actually are being rented at that level, those are luxury units by and large, and they follow the same policy basis that has been there in the RSO for exempting those types of units from the RSO. And we thought that that's a better approach towards the fundamental concerns that you have in terms of people who are paying, who can obviously afford a place like that, having the protections of rent control, as opposed to the idea of means testing.
But that wasn't analyzed in the report. It wasn't even in the report.
I'm sorry,
It
Councilman?
wasn't even in the study.
The luxury exemption?
Right.
This was not in the, this was actually a
No,
recommendation that we
we
came
sort of
up
throw it
with
out.
in our supplemental report.
Calm down.
Right, I believe you're quite correct about that, Councilman, that the recommendation with regards to updating the luxury exemptions was not in the report. This is a report that the Housing Department came up with in response to the concerns that we heard around means testing in the testimony that was received through all of the hearings that this committee held.
I don't have a problem with updating, but there has been no analysis as to the impact of the method that you are recommending. And I think it would be very dangerous for us to impose that. Number one, I think that tenant vacancies would automatically go to the luxury level to avoid RSO in some cases. And then this was a one-time exemption. So we would reinstitute a one-time exemption based on a figure that we haven't analyzed thoroughly. So I have a severe problem with the luxury exemption. I don't have a problem in theory. I have a problem with how it's been thrust on us without full analysis.
I understand the point, Councilman. I also just want to clarify that this would also be essentially a one-time exemption, so that regardless of how you decide this issue, and we presented it to you, but it's not as if you could say, let's raise the rent to that amount and now apply for it. You had to have already been doing it as of May 2010 for that unit. So just want to clarify that point.
Yeah, but you are correct. This was just an attempt to update provisions that were already within the RSO. It was nothing Really nothing beyond that? And this was not analyzed, as I understand it, within the study itself, or addressed within
But my
the study
problem is
itself.
that I have many units that fall into that scale, but are in no way, shape, or form luxury apartments.
And my problem, my dear friend, is that generally the chair gets to finish his questions, okay? So if we could get back to that, and then I'll kick it over to you. I'm curious about the current system, and I mentioned it last week, where it relates to penalties for late payments and what have you. So how is that set up today?
Roberto, did you want to address the issues that the councilman raised last week?
Sure. I believe you're speaking to the rent registration fees and the systematic code enforcement fees, which we send out every January 1st of the year. It's called our annual bill. It's a combined bill. We give them until February 28th by which to pay. I believe the council member suggested last week that we extend that by 15 days. We took a look at that. Currently, we're at a crossroad, if you will, with the Office of Finance. The city's billing policy is 30 days, and after 30 days it becomes delinquent, and they want to refer it to collection. We give 60 days by which the landlord must pay their annual bill. We think that's adequate enough time for them to pay. Extending it 15 more days would conflict with what the city policy is, and it also would reduce our late fee payments that we receive.
By how much?
About $1.5 million. And as you know, we're special funded. We receive no funds from the general fund.
There has to be a better way that we can do that, though. What I don't know. That's why I was suggesting.
We took a hard look at it, council member. The city gives 30 days, we give 60 days by which the bill to be paid.
Well, that's something that I think when you and I meet monthly, maybe the next time we meet, we can have a discussion about this.
Absolutely.
And
Right.
maybe some other creative ways in which we can do that. Now, Andrew mentioned that there might be some problems where it relates to mobile home parks or concerns. So if we were to move forward and take this action, what effect does it have on them?
It's a good point. Haka, you've been dealing with the mobile home issue for some time now.
Yes.
I think, Richard, you have the most, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, I believe so.
Council members, the RSO has always had the same annual increase amounts for mobile homes. Mobile homes are particularly unique and hybrid form of tenancy and ownership, because mobile home owners typically are both homeowners and tenants. And the mobile home residency law of the state of California dominates this area. And so one of the few areas that locally, our local rent control provisions apply is with regards to the annual adjustments and with regards to the pass-throughs such as capital improvements or primary renovation, things like that. So it's really the increase of the rent where our focus is. In the past couple of years, this body has approved closures of some loopholes that existed under state law, so that because under state law, if you actually have a contract for longer than 12 months, you're exempt from local rent control. The law that you all adopted said that the landlord has to tell that on the contract before somebody signs the lease, so that they know that they're opting for exemption from local rent control in exchange for a longer lease agreement. One of the other issues that is affecting mobile homes has to do with litigation that is going on at the Federal District Court, the Federal Court of Appeals in the Ninth Circuit around the mobile home rent control ordinance that was in the city of Goleta that was ruled as a as an unconstitutional taking. And there was a 3-court panel that actually issued that decision. And now the full Ninth Circuit has agreed to rehear that decision. And so that is a legal issue that is there, that's pending, that could impact any changes that are made that would affect mobile homes. The city attorney's office would have to, of course, advise specifically on that.
Okay. Ms. Perry or Mr. Reyes, before I let, what is that movie they say, release the Kraken before I release the Kraken? You know? Before I release the Kraken. So I thought you might want to go.
No, because the Kraken... Kraken's going to burn the house down.
What was it?
No, Kraken. It's the Kraken.
Clash of the Titans.
Yeah, Clash of the
Yeah.
Titans. No, I saw it.
Yes.
First one and the second one.
Well, that's what he's accusing me of.
Yeah, no,
Ms.
no.
Perry.
Just hold him in check for just a minute.
Yes, I.
Well, and then you can let it rip. Okay. Thank you. First of all, I wanted to say to the department that they've done a decent job of finding a balance between property owner needs and tenant interests. And Mr. Chair, I am interested in moving this report to council, and I look forward to reviewing the actual amendments when LAHD and the City Attorney's Office return to committee with the revised ordinances. There are several key changes recommended in the LAHD report related to the primary renovation program, the capital improvement program, and the just and reasonable rent adjustments. Now, as the department moves forward with streamlining these programs and crafting the new applications, I want to make sure that we do the due diligence and also involve the property owner or landlord community to make sure that whatever changes are proposed can actually be implemented in a practical way in the field. I'd also like to make an amendment to ask the department to engage the building owner community in the process and developing this process. I'd also like to ask the department to review, like you, Mr. Chair, I'm interested in the rent stabilization ordinance as it applies to mobile home parks. And again, like to ask LAHD to work with the mobile home park stakeholders on a comprehensive review because of the hybrid nature of ownership and tenancy. And my hope is that we'll be able to collect data that would better inform us, and if possible, if this can be done within the next couple of weeks, so that we can keep this moving together in one package. And hopefully the data will include operating costs to maintain the park, average mortgage payments on the mobile home, and what the typical profit margins and losses are for both the mobile home owner and the park owner. Those are my concerns.
Oh, and I share a lot of those concerns as well. Mr. Reyes?
Remember, the Kraken likes human sacrifice. Okay.
You're right.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
right.
the
You gotta
movie
feed 'em-
now.
Yeah. Right.
I'm not going to pursue that.
You're not going to
I can keep going. I can keep going. No, I'll let it go. The motion that we had introduced back in May, and I just want this for the record, how does the report respond to it, and how are we addressing those issues?
I'm sorry, Councilman, which particular motion are you referring to?
We speak to the directives the feasibility of eliminating a 3% floor consistent recommendation economic roundtable, the feasibility of eliminating the extra percentage increases for utilities because according to the study there is no connection between the annual master metered increase, and C, the feasibility of defining mom and pop landlords in the event. Just for the record, I'd just like to hear how that was addressed. And once you're done, I have a couple of more questions.
Well, I'll start with the floor. That's been kind of the core of the analysis of all of this, is dealing with the floor. The recommendations of the Economic Roundtable were to eliminate the floor altogether and just go with the CPI. And again, we've had numerous hearings both before and after the May hearings and directives from City Council and from the committee in that regard. And we've tried to take a moderated view in this by coming down in the middle, and we've tried to take a look at the historic pattern of the CPI over the 30-year period, and felt that the recommendations we were coming forth with, we recognized the concern that had been raised in council, but we felt that the recommendations we were coming forth with was the moderate approach to take, which both allowed for the continuation of a floor that had been put in place some time ago by City Council in recognition of the needs of the landlords, and on the other hand, recognizing where the historical inflation rate currently is, and providing it's a 1/3 reduction in the floor by dropping this down to a recommended 2% floor.
And when we heard testimony over the series of meetings, and the notion of pass-throughs and how that impacts the tenants, I'm trying to find that middle ground as well.
Yes.
And when I look at the concerns raised, in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, aren't there other resources that the city has within its different funding mechanisms that does not penalize the landlord, but does not impose upon the tenant to come up with those additional funds given the level of increases that are being suggested?
Well,
is there a way to create a nexus between the level of need given the criteria and the profile, or should I say the economic condition of the individual, the tenant, while not imposing upon the landlord? Is there any other funding mechanisms that we can look to offset that cost?
Well, we haven't been able to identify other funding mechanisms, but I think it's worth taking a minute to talk about the pass-throughs, to perhaps explain those a little more thoroughly so that people fully understand what the intent of the pass-throughs are and what the impact would be.
Right, because what we've been hearing have been from both sides of the spectrum, at least the polar ends. And so trying to understand what is actually occurring.
Yeah, we'd like to address any misconceptions that there might be or misunderstanding. And Anna, if you could address some of those, and Haka will address the utility adjustment that we're recommending.
Yes, Councilman. With the pass-throughs, there's two different kinds of pass-throughs that are allowed for property improvements. The most common one is a capital improvement pass-through, and that's for additions, replacements, flooring, painting, new appliances, things like that. The current rules allow pass-through of 60% of the costs over 72 months. And in keeping with the recommendations from the Economic Roundtable, we're recommending that instead landlords be allowed to recover 75% of those costs, but over 120 months. We're lengthening it to 10 years. So for instance, right now, your average capital improvement pass-through is $24. Under the proposal, the average increase would only be $18, but it would be collected over 10 years. Again, this would only affect long-term tenants. The typical turnover is 4 or 5 years, so your typical tenant would actually pay less during the time that they're a tenant, and they would be paying less monthly. The landlord would recover more from those long-staying tenants who, after all, benefit from having this new improvement for a longer time. So we've tried to balance. We've increased the total recovery over the long term, but actually decreased the monthly rent increase on the capital improvements.
Now, when I look at the concept versus the practice, the implementation, there tends to be a gap in what is actually occurring in our city. For example, if we do these improvements and we go back and check on the quality of those improvements, the value of that improvement, and the actual incremental change of that environment, do we have the capacity to assess the quality given the cost that's being identified and the burden that's being put upon the tenant? Do we have the mechanism within our department to actually have that capacity to assess that? Because it's been my experience where I will go to apartment units and I will hear from the manager or the property owner. I'm saying it's everybody. I'm just speaking to those specific cases that you have certain individuals who just use the apartments as an ATM machine. They're not really taking care of the tenant. I mean, it happens in my district. And they'll say, well, we took care of the kitchen, we took care of the wall area where the sink is hooked up to the main line of water and hot water, and I touched the wall, and you can put your finger through it because it's still soft given the moisture and the poor job that was done. But yet they have the bills. They've got the new faucet, but the work behind the wall has been poorly done, as proven by the moisture in there. But the cost was still there, and they still have to carry the burden. I mean, I'm asking, do we have that capacity given our current condition, given our cutbacks, given our ability to implement? That to me is a very critical factor, because then it's our council offices that end up getting all the phone calls. We end up going out to the community. We get the tension, the frustration, and the pushback when we have those cases. And I'm told, well, I'm sorry, we only have so many people on staff. So that to me, I need to carry this through.
Yes. I can tell you what we do have. No, we don't have inspectors that go out and look at the items applied for, but we do have very thorough Rent Adjustment Commission regulations, which don't allow a pass-through as a capital improvement for repairs and maintenance. So if it's a repairs and maintenance item, that is not eligible under the capital improvement program. What is eligible are replacements or additions, improvements that have a 5-year useful life or more. Also in the process, landlords sometimes think...
I'm sorry, just for the sake of clarity, can you give me examples of what these improvements, how would you identify these improvements? What would a tenant be able to understand as an improvement under that category?
Like a new refrigerator, a new stove, replacement of the flooring. And what staff looks at is the invoices and contracts for the work. We also, as part of the existing process, notify the tenants at the beginning of the process when their landlord has submitted an application. We tell them what the landlord has applied for, and the tenants have a certain period of time to object to an increase for that item. So they sometimes write back and object and say, well, I didn't get that, or it broke, it doesn't work. And that would cause us to then go look more closely at that submittal. It has to have a 5-year useful life. So if it doesn't last for 5 years, it's not allowable.
And you're suggesting that we do have the capacity to perform based on those types of cases?
Yes, we do.
As a department, given the volume of work that's out there?
Well, right now, we only get applications about 40 a month.
40 a month.
And we do carefully vet each of those applications. Landlords sometimes complain that we're too thorough in our review.
Okay.
In addition, Councilmember, I think your question goes to the fact is, do we have a mechanism by which we can evaluate whether or not these capital improvements are improving the lives of the tenants who reside in those units? And obviously, we do not have enough staff, sufficient staff to actually go out and inspect.
We do not.
We do not. What we do have, however, we've seen, since we're entering our 3rd cycle of the systematic code enforcement program, what we have seen is a substantial decrease in the number of violations that are occurring. We stipulate that there are situations where the landlords do go into apartments and they make shoddy repairs. We stipulate to that. We also stipulate to the fact that sometimes the repairs itself does not result in the systematic change that needs to be done. For example, the life cycle of a plumbing system may be at its near end. And what's needed is not patching up the plumbing. What would be needed would be replacement of the entire system.
Right.
We understand that. So we think through our code enforcement program, and I can get you the numbers and get you the analysis, that we think when our inspectors go out there, the number of complaints that we've been seeing, because they know we're coming out, have decreased substantially.
No, and I think there's a relation between displacement and the decrease in cases because of not only the economy, but of all the other issues that we know is occurring to our communities. But when I was trying to refer to a funding mechanism, I know because one doesn't exist doesn't mean one cannot be created. Is there any other model in this country that speaks to how we offset the cost of those pass-throughs so that the tenant doesn't have to carry the burden and the landlord is not also imposed upon given these, the cost to the landlord? Is there anything out there that we can look to that speaks to that need to sustain that quality of life?
There's nothing that I'm directly aware of, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I know that the question had been asked a few months ago, I believe by this committee here, Isn't there some way that we can come up with a funding mechanism to do, for instance, emergency repairs to assist particularly the smaller landlords that need the help? And we've been working, Roberto, your staff has been working on coming up with a way to do that. We haven't been able to identify any resources to do it with. But I think we're happy to put together a proposal and maybe working with you to help to identify some resources that would allow us to address the type of concern that you're raising here.
If we were to come up with that type of an approach, one, I think it lowers the heat on these extreme discussions and trying to get to the middle ground. I know we need housing for our tenants. I know all tenants are not all angels, and I know all landlords are not all angels as well. But there is this middle ground in the City of Angels. Thank you, Richard. I can never lack for commentary. But the fact is, that's the direction I think we should be going if we're not going to get into this clash that we continue to find ourselves in, and we find ourselves spending more time fighting than coming up with resolutions. And so if there is a way to come up with that, I think that would bode well for many of our stakeholders. I'll stop here, Councilmember. There's a few more questions, but I'll stop because I know we're running out of time.
Just go right ahead. With that said, you are released.
Actually, I just think that we haven't embraced the opportunities very similar to what Mr. Reyes was speaking of. And the pressure that is bearing upon us is number one, the glaring evidence that is demonstrated in the report that the city is rent burdened. And this is a relatively new concept for me, but the notion is that you're just paying way too much for your rent to be able to manage all the other things. So philosophically, I have a fundamental problem with doing anything to increase the tenant burden, because the study makes it very clear that we are rent burdened. On the other hand, the owners have experienced a very real depreciation of their asset, which puts them in a position to not be able to acquire financing for whatever purposes they might need in life, but most notably to repair their properties, maintain them, and even upgrade them. So it's the worst possible time for us to be bringing this matter forward. And I believe that there are many opportunities that have not been fully explored that would alleviate some of the stress. So number one, we know that that we have provided. I initiated many efforts to alleviate the stress on business. We're working with the film industry. We're working most recently with the internet companies, 3 little internet companies. We give a special tax break, and here we have an industry that affects 60% of the population. It seems to me we ought to be exploring tax breaks. The gross receipts tax should be targeted. We know that we have 3 departments that manage economic development financing programs: DWP, the CRA, and the Community Development Department, not to mention the Housing Department, have financing mechanisms, and DWP ought to be encouraging financing for upgrading buildings, particularly when it's related to energy and water savings. And CRA ought to be looking at upgrading these buildings as a business investment, but also as a beautification effort for their local communities. And I just don't think that sending this to council at this time is wise, because I believe, as Mr. Reyes does, and I believe as the chair is very sensitive to, that we can do better. We can offer a more holistic approach that might alleviate some of the contradictions that create so much stress. The contradiction that we are increasing burdens on tenants at a time when we've defined them as rent burdened. Let me give you one interesting thing. When we pass through the DWP rate for the common area usage, are we giving the tenants the discount rate that they get when they pay their utility bill, or is it at the rate that the owners are paying? Are we going to therefore reduce the costs citywide? I don't think anybody thought about that, but a tenant should not be paying the normal rate if they are participating in the discount program at DWP. So if you pass through the common area costs, DWP is going to take a big hit, and they better know it's coming. I think that's a contradiction. But I also believe that the owners have invested in properties that really are the bulk of our affordable housing program. And we ought to recognize that and give them more support for investing in the affordable housing industry. I'm not suggesting that we dole out money to luxury landlords. What I'm saying is that that the vast majority of apartments are in areas that are depressed or economically challenged, working class communities, and it seems to me that our policies ought to encourage investment into those areas. And so what I would like to do, Mr. Chair, is delay this so that I can more fully explore as chair of the Business Development Committee the opportunities to work with DWP, to work with the CRA, to work with the Community Development Department, for example, with Community Development Block Grant Funds, to see if we can't create programs that can identify not just hardships, but opportunities for economic improvement, and at the same time alleviate some of the burdens that we are now, or that the department is recommending we impose on the tenants, as opposed to the landlords. I believe we need to add more investment, more opportunities, more dollars into the pool that the tenants and the landlords don't have. And so by doing that, I think we design a better program and that addresses the actual analysis in the report. And Ms. Perry, I agree with you on the mobile home parks. It's just a real challenge because I'm very aware of the litigation that's pending, and that's just one we might have to table until the litigation is completed. It's a very serious problem. But on the other stuff, we've drafted a motion that tries to capture all these things, but it's going to take some time to get into some of the details. So, Mr. Chair, what I would recommend is that perhaps we either deal with this as a joint committee of the Business Development Committee. Give me an opportunity to have the staff of the Business Development Committee incorporate some of the notions that we've applied to the film industry, that we are proposing for the restaurant industry, that we're looking at for the car sales industry, that we're looking at, that we just did for the internet companies, and in fact, by creating the business tax holiday, we did for all businesses of less than $100,000 a year in revenue. I see this in the same vein, that these are the bulk of business owners in the city of Los Angeles. They impact 60% of the population of Los Angeles, and it is in our economic interest, and I think our social responsibility to look at a more holistic approach that considers some of the other economic opportunities.
Well, I wouldn't want to call it a delay. I think that I don't think we're done, and I think we need to just continue to work on this issue to try to build a better product.
And we don't have the pressure of the rent increases because that was in July.
Yeah. So I would suggest we do form, we'd have a joint committee hearing. We work on this, and I'm thinking 45 days.
If you don't mind, Mr. Chair, I'm going to go ahead and vote no on that.
Okay.
Okay, because,
No,
at some point we have to,
No, I
move
get
ahead.
you. I get you.
Yeah.
And I just think that the possibility of benefits to landlords and tenants, but I think the possibility of benefits for the landlords exists here if we take the time and, get like the finance people to let us know how much, this is going to cost or what have you. And as I reflect back, I wish that was something that, I would have thought of earlier, so we would have, but that's something that I think definitely needs to be thought of. So what we'll do, we will, Mr. City Attorney, you tell me how we word this, because I want to afford the courtesy to Ms. Perry so that she,
Make my vote.
so she can make her vote. In fact, Mr. Reyes would like to add a couple items. In fact, so let us take one more, significant look at this. And again, I don't want to. I'm proud of the hard work that the department, put into this. But Liz, I want to be able to say, I think we did the best we could do, and I don't believe I can say that today. So Mr. Reyes has a couple of things that he'd like to add, and then let's just see how this thing begins to take shape.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just given the nature of our dialogue earlier, I think one of the items that need to be factored into this discussion is our capacity to perform. We spoke to our staffing levels. Given the pressures that are already there because of our recent cutbacks, and given the volume of need as it grows, as our economy continues to stumble along, more pressure on landlords and more displacement for the tenants. So how we address the quality of the service is going to be significant. So if we're going to be speaking to these funding mechanisms, how do we support the department to perform? I think that is a variable that needs to be factored in this discussion. I want to thank the mayor's office in getting us to this place and their initial report and efforts. At the same time, decision being made by the executive arm of the city and how we deal with cutbacks and budgets. And so how we start balancing that out is critical in terms of our performance. Mr. Chair, somehow we need to factor in our ability to perform and to be accountable in terms of who is benefiting from these funding mechanisms. Because I don't believe the landlords are very significant, but the market is just as significant, which are the tenants. And I think that's a balancing act we have to continue trying to achieve.
If I could briefly comment on the staffing issue, the department, the LA Housing Department has been fortunate, even with all the city cutbacks and difficulties of this past year. Our funding is derived from the fees that we do collect, as well as outside resources, primarily from HUD. So we have not been impacted by staffing cutbacks. To the contrary, we've actually been able to fill positions that had been vacant for some period of time, and we've been able to increase our staff by bringing over people from other city departments that have been general funded. So our staffing capacity right now is actually pretty good to implement the program that we currently have in place. However, to the extent we develop an additional program which will provide financing mechanisms, perhaps financial incentives to allow for improvements to the rental housing stock. Of course, it depends on that program and how large it is, but that would require necessary staffing to go with that.
Well, I'm a little, I don't want to sound flippant here, but we should have more inspectors then. We should have greater quality in terms of our capacity to negotiate with landlords and tenants so that both parties are not suffering the way they are. And because we don't have enough inspectors out there, I applaud the inspectors in my district. I mean, to me, they're the unsung heroes, because they go out of their way and they make that effort. But they have a huge volume.
Yes, they do.
And so that's why I'm a little taken aback by your statement, because if that's the case, does that mean we're not prioritizing the quality of that service when it comes to inspectors?
No, to the contrary. And Roberta, maybe you can address the specifics here, but it's only been in the last couple of months that we've been able to bring on a significant increase in our inspectors. How many inspectors have we added to the staff?
I believe we've taken a little over 10 inspectors from the Building and Safety Department, as well as some assistant inspectors who were on the layoff list.
So could we get in this report the nature of the backlog, the level of demand to address these issues that are out there?
Absolutely. Understanding, Councilmember, that the scale of the housing stock for the code enforcement is a little over 760,000 units, and we try to get out there on a 4-year cycle. And granted, while there is a need for more inspectors, that would have to come from some funding source. And the funding source that we have are fees, which would mean that we would have to raise fees in order to hire more inspectors. Now, we haven't had to come to this body for a fee increase since 2005.
But now's the opportunity. The chairman, as well as the chair of the other committee, is suggesting we assess the impact economically of what these policies will do. Now, if we have this weakness, if this is fee-driven, and that amount of funding limits our ability to perform, and let's understand what's in front of us so that the tenants don't have to suffer and the landlords don't have to carry the burden.
And we welcome that, Councilmember.
That's what I'm looking forward to.
Okay. So the recommendation will be to begin dialoguing with the department, that we will convene a joint committee hearing with the jobs and this committee, and that we should be ready with recommendations within, let's say, no longer than 45 days. And how do we bring that to, do we have to how can we vote on that?
Well, I guess, yeah, I mean, essentially, if there was a vote, it would be a vote, I guess, to continue the item for
Okay,
up
so
to
then that's
45 days. And the
okay, so
record-
then, no, I got it. So we're going to vote to continue this for 45 days. And I think we have to do, well, we don't have to do a roll call vote. We'll do Mr. Reyes is a aye vote, Mr. Alacon's a aye vote, I'm a aye vote, Ms. Perry's a no vote. So that'll be the order of the day where it relates to this item. Now, I know that you put in a card to speak. Last Wednesday, we had a hearing that lasted forever. And believe it or not, I got agreement from both sides that there was going to be no public comment. And I think you would want to be with the in crowd and join everybody else. That I truly appreciate that you let us do this the way that I wanted. Okay, with that said, is there so what are you still what?
Just going to general public comment.
Okay, come forward. I have a joke about that, but Miss Perry would not want me to do that.
Don't do it.
Mr. Chair?
Even though it's a cute one.
Cute?
It is
All right, you
cute.
tell me downstairs.
Yes.
1 or
Okay.
2 minutes.
One minute.
Safety zone.
Okay. It was a good one, though, but I'm glad. Thinking of you.
I'm helping you.
Because if you weren't here, I would have done it.
I'm helping you.
Be assured.
Okay.
I would have.
We've been warned.
Okay, Noel, your time is rolling. Let's
All right,
go.
thank you. I wanted to, the governor, Herb, again, we've talked about the idea of uniting as opposed to dividing. Landlords versus tenants, it's just 260s, 270s. Okay, we've got to find ways to unite. I propose, Janice Hahn has put into the housing element a concept called TOPA. It's been the law in Washington, D.C. since 1980, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. As luck would have it, once in a while, a little gem appears from the state legislature. It just was signed by the governor. You now have it all before you. It's SB 454. This law has, as far as I'm concerned, it's a Picasso painting. It has the potential, with a little bit of the exercise of a little creativity, a little bit of imagination, a little less ego, I think we could be in a position where we could start beginning to implement this law locally. What this law does essentially is, through state action, gives tenants the right to come together as a collective through associations, could be nonprofits, could be whatever. Now I'm into 3 minutes. Basically buy the building, or 3 seconds. So take a look at the law, to be continued, and I think this is a potential here to try to get to where we need to go.
Okay, I want to
Brand new.
thank you, and I want to thank everybody else for coming. Is there any more business before this
Mr. Chair,
committee? Yes.
before adjourning, you may wish to revisit items 1 through 7 since they were considered when there wasn't a quorum?
Yes. So, Mr. Alarcon, we prior to your arrival, we dealt with 6 or 7 items. Mr. Alarcon is indicating that he's supportive of that. So those actions are no longer communiques of the chair. They're recommendations of this committee. This committee's adjourned. Thank you all.